While I was doing research on this Becky Hill story, I came across an article in Post and Courier that really, truly shocked me to my core. So I wanted to do a special follow-up and share with you what I found. Let's get started. This is Legal Updates with Cassidy. Turns out, Becky Hill is not the only clerk of court helping herself, or the worst. Welcome. I just wanted to do a quick follow-up on this Becky Hill story. My crew knows how I love my graphs and charts, so naturally I had to make some. I wanted visual aids on exactly how this money was spent. So first, I color-coded each of the counts as you can see here. For example, the bonuses are green, yellow is gifts, blue is meals, pink is a combination of meals and gifts, purple is meals and gifts combined with alcohol, white is miscellaneous, and light orange is money paid to a business that she is affiliated with. As I said while reading this in the first episode, there seems to be an abundance of meals and gifts. Now I'll post these charts in my community tab so you can have a good look at them later. But before we go on, I really wanted to thank you all for the insightful comments that you put here. A lot of you have much more experience in this area, and you provided your knowledge, which I really truly thank you for. Others of you just had a really great way of expressing yourselves, so thank you all for those comments. I do try to read each and every comment on my page. Now they really do kind of go back and forth, with some asking for her to go to prison, some saying it's not as bad as thought, and many of you just have the same questions I do. Who was approving this money? What made her think that it was okay to make these charges to the court? Is this how it's been done here and she was just following suit? If not, how was it not discovered? Because, as I mentioned last time, some of these things happened in 2021. Is this the same checks and balances as Palmetto State Bank and PMPED? I also had on my list to research court funding, the law codes that were mentioned in this complaint, just to try to discover how something like this could happen in the first place. As I said in the intro, I came across an article from the Post and Courier. It's dated May 19th. I think you should all read it. And I am going to share it here in a link in my comment, so please go and check it out later. It was written by Tad Moore, and like I said, it came out on May the 19th. It's entitled, South Carolina Doesn't Check How Clerks of Court Use Federal Money. At least 6 paid themselves. So to my surprise, this article tells us that this sort of behavior is not limited to Becky Hill at all. In fact, you probably all remember Miss Rhonda, the clerk of court from Barnwell, who was ever so happy to testify against Becky before Justice Toll when she came to court, in my opinion, to self-promote her next election. Miss Rhonda is one of the named clerks of court that has had her own greedy hand in the cookie jar. After these allegations came out, I just kept questioning how Becky had access to this money with no one noticing. It was also strange that no one had complained about it or questioned her using funds for things like birthday parties and so many gifts and meals. I was really shocked when I saw she had access to the kinds of funds such as the child support account. Since we know how courthouses are funded and that some of them struggle, this lack of oversight seemed strange to me. You'd think they'd be watching every dime. Taking a look at this annual report specifically about South Carolina courthouses, we see first that county clerks' financing comes from local funding. That means taxes paid within Colleton County. And because courthouses are struggling, it does mention in this report that South Carolina's trial courts are funded by city, town, and county governments, resulting in a disparity in funding between the wealthier and poorest counties. Locally funded would be, of course, Colleton County, where I found the median household income is less than $47,000 a year. And as many places, there is a huge disparity between the high income and low income, with 13% of Colleton County families living in poverty. So these are the folks whose taxes pay for Becky's income. I wonder if they get treated to free lunches, to Valentine's and Mother's Day gifts at work. I wonder how many of them get an almost $500 birthday party. I wonder if their bosses buy their dogs food and treats and a bed. So again, with this in mind, my question only burns stronger. How did she have access to this kind of money? Well, as Samuel Jackson said in Jurassic Park, hold on to your butts. The article says that at least 6 of South Carolina's clerks of court have treated themselves to bonuses or boosted their pay using, it calls it, little watched pots of federal money. What's this federal money for? It's intended to support children and families. So Post and Courier did an investigation into this. They found that this is federal money, and we'll get to how this money is all supposed to go, that's given to the state. The state divides it up and distributes it. In this investigation, the state agency admitted to Post and Courier that it doesn't monitor how clerks spend the money. What's the money for? It's intended to overwrite the cost of enforcing child support orders. So as we know in our country, child support is a problem. It's too big of a problem for federal courts to handle, so they offer this money to the states. The states offer this money to the counties. Clerks of court and other staff are supposed to use this money to help enforce child support orders. But here's the thing. The South Carolina Department of Social Services, or as we'll call from here on out, DSS, doesn't ask the clerks for details on their spending. They just ask for a summary every few months. Now, the clerks sign contracts promising that they'll only use the money to bolster the child support system. And then from there, the state, which probably doesn't have a lot of funding to follow up on it and should, in fact, be able to trust clerks of court, it simply assumes from there that they'll keep their word. No one from the DSS checks up on these clerks to see how this money's spent. It's all just presumed that they will spend it responsibly and use good judgment, and you should be able to trust someone in that position to do so. They call it a hands-off approach. Like I said, they themselves probably don't have enough funding or manpower to check up on them. But how do these clerks keep up their promises? Well, in 2011, Beaufort County's former clerk pleaded guilty to paying her husband tens of thousands of dollars from this federal child support account. Another clerk, even more recently, was investigated by the FBI for using it to grant herself bonuses. Now, the South Carolina Attorney General's office warned the clerks of court that it may not be legal for them to use this money to pay themselves extra. But it turns out the Post and Courier found that this practice is more prevalent than previously known. Post and Courier requested spending records from all 46 of South Carolina clerks of court using the Freedom of Information Act. At a minimum, they found the following counties had clerks who'd paid themselves with this money: Barnwell, Chesterfield, Colleton, Hampton, Jasper, and Williamsburg. But they believe the true number is probably higher still. One of the clerks gave herself extra pay even after an earlier raise had triggered a federal investigation. So having been investigated didn't stop her. She did it again. Another gave herself a $5,000 bonus while spending only 12 minutes per day on child support cases. This money is paid specifically for them to spend time to help them with this child support problem. So while they're busy spending this money, they've only got 12 minutes a day to try to help these kids and these moms out there that are waiting for someone to help them to get their child support payments. But meanwhile, they're giving themselves $5,000 bonuses and paying their husbands tens of thousands of dollars and getting Valentines and buying lunch and gifts. Sue Berkowitz, who is the policy director at the South Carolina Appleseed Legal Justice Center, said that this really calls for oversight and change. She says if the DSS doesn't have the manpower to audit clerks, the state should task someone else with the job, because the bottom line is that this is money that's to support children and families. It is not being spent as intended, and it needs to be addressed. So what are they supposed to be using this money for in particular? We've said it's for child support, but here's what it is. If parents stop making their required payments, the clerks are given the authority to try to track them down and convene court hearings to make them pay. The federal government actually grants millions of dollars every year into this fund because child support is such a nationwide problem. Now, clerks who are using it correctly buy things like a database called LexisNexis, where they can find elusive parents' phone numbers and mailing addresses. Some have gone even further, buying police cars for family court investigators. These are proper uses of this money. This is what it's about. These are clerks who are actually taking this role seriously to put this money to good use. The problem is there are few guardrails on how this money is spent. There are very few specific restrictions. And this part was what really struck me. The actual county governments aren't allowed to get in the way of this spending. Under state law, clerks have virtually unfettered control. So, these funds come to the Clerks of Court, and the courthouse that they work in can't say how that money is distributed. That's left entirely up to these clerks. So that's how they're able to spend it as they please. The DSS also openly admitted that they don't have routine monitors in place, but they do ask for a high-level summary of their expenditures, not detailed records. It encourages clerks to reach out if they're unsure about the spending, whether or not what they want to spend it on is proper, but it does not require it. They are allowed to bring back some of the funding if it's found that a clerk is misusing the money, but an audit in South Carolina has not been done in at least the past 2 years. The agency was also asked by Post and Courier for documentation of every time there was an issue with the clerk's spending in recent years, but the agency had no such records. Looking at this article, it seems Becky doesn't even come close to being the worst offender. Others have used their funds to pay for employee recognition events, like baby showers, a retirement party, and at least one outing to the movies. They've sponsored a youth baseball team, advertised in a community calendar, and get this. This is going to make you sick. This made me sick. Paid for a trip to a conference at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, which featured an optional outing to a 12-time James Beard Award nominee's restaurant. Can you imagine how much that cost? How did that help these children sitting there waiting for child support? How did this help these moms out there struggling, whose tax money is paying these clerks of court? How did this trip to Vegas help these people? And the thing is, the clerks of court make good wages. We're going to see that in a while. It goes on. At least 10 clerks have used this money to stay at beachfront hotels in Myrtle Beach. Now, there's conferences that are put on by the South Carolina Association of Clerks of Court. Remember, Rhonda's the head of that? So they have these conferences where they're supposed to be talking about this child support and the efforts that they should be taking to carry it out. But it's usually not what's being discussed. In fact, there's a recent conference that lasted from Sunday to Thursday. In all of those days, there was a 1-hour session that was related to the collection of child support. Can you imagine how much money was spent on a Sunday to Thursday conference? In a statement, the DSS indicated that the system has worked adequately. I'm assuming they mean nationwide, and maybe there's just some trouble spots like this in certain areas. But back to this Beaufort County clerk who paid her husband tens of thousands. Her husband was a drug court judge. She paid him $68,500. Her unauthorized expenses totaled more than $112,000. Like I said, kinda makes Becky's look like nothing. Not that it is nothing, it's something. So someone finally complained to the State Ethics Commission, which is the same place that just issued these allegations against Becky. She was finally investigated, and she ended up being convicted on multiple state charges. Turns out that wasn't the only account she was using. She had other accounts under her control that she used to buy life insurance policies and insure a beach house. One of the very specific rules about this money is that it cannot be used to pay judges, although she paid her judge husband almost $70,000. Another one of the big things that they find is that the clerks use this money to pay themselves, as we saw with Becky, where the first 5 counts were her paying herself bonuses. In 2022, the Williamsburg County Clerk of Court, Sharon Staggers, used the money to give herself a $30,000 per year raise after the county council denied her a pay increase. $30,000. Some people don't even make that much as a wage. She gave herself that much as a pay increase. So the FBI got involved in that. But as of yet, Staggers has not been charged with the crime. Her investigation through SLED is still open, though. When Becky Hill was questioned about her use of these funds, she claimed that she had spent as much as 40% of her time on child support matters, and claims that there are records that show this. So this is another point that will come out in this investigation as it progresses. The article goes on to say that Hill and Staggers are far from the only clerks to pay themselves with federal money. In Chesterfield County, Clerk Christy Gaddy was paid $5,000 in November of 2023, along with several members of her staff. It was recorded as ad income. In her paperwork reporting, she had spent just 12 minutes a day on child support cases, but felt she was entitled to bonuses. Her reported earning was $69,396 just as being a clerk. In Hampton County, Clerk Melinda Nettles took home $9,000 from a March 2022 bonus, which she said was owed to an extra workload. Now, the county administrator and human resources department signed off on that payment. And it wasn't just $9,000. It came to more than $12,000 when you include fringe expenses. Her reported income was $58,221 that year. In Jasper County, Clerk Margaret Bostick received one-time payments in December along with members of her staff each of the past 2 years. Her payments totaled $14,750, while she was earning $77,099 last year. In Barnwell County, Clerk Rhonda McElveen included herself in a round of bonuses for the staff at the end of 2021. She said they were meant to acknowledge a difficult year of learning a new system and navigating courthouse renovations. But what does that have to do with child support? She said she gave all 8 recipients, including herself, the same $1,000 plus fringe costs. Doesn't say how much the fringe costs were, but she earned $70,206 that year. She claims that DSS gave her permission to give the bonuses. They thought that it was fine, and that if they hadn't, she wouldn't have paid herself. Are you guys as sickened by this as I am? I should think so. The government struggles to keep up with the child support situation. They provide this incentive to get help from local courts, and this is what they do with it? Their salaries are already higher, almost double, in fact, the local household income, not single-person income, the combined household income that we saw at the beginning of this podcast. And yet, they are helping themselves to money that's intended to pay for their help to deal with the child support problem. Now, that being said, except for these bonuses, the complaint against Becky doesn't say if all these checks came from those funds, so we'll have to wait for more information to find out. But back to Becky's complaint. I thought looking up the codes that she's in violation of would help explain a little better. But there are only 3 different codes that are mentioned on the documents, and one of them is more administrative stuff. But they offer very little information on exactly how her conduct is illegal. Now, I was hoping there might be some insight, like what kinds of expenses are allowed, which kinds are forbidden, but no, we're still left in the dark here. The main law that makes up over 99% of the complaints is here. It's Article 7, Section 8, 13-700. Under the use of official position or office for financial gain, disclosure of potential conflict of interest. And it's Part A that's specifically noted for almost all of these complaints. It says no public official, public member, or public employee may knowingly use his official office, membership, or employment to obtain an economic interest for himself, a family member, an individual with whom he is associated, or a business with which he is associated. Now that makes sense for the bonuses and the business. This prohibition does not extend to the incidental use of public materials, personnel, or equipment subject to or available for a public official's, public members, or public employees' use that does not result in additional public expense. So this law, it's not super clear. I think it could be subjective. So like I said, when I went to look this up, I was hoping there was some things more clearly defined, such as can't be used for meals, can't be used for gifts, but this is all there is this law. So we'll have to see how they interpret this law at the hearing, and in turn, how the Attorney General's office interprets this law as far as charging her criminally. But the one thing about it is when you have a corporation that's privately owned, the owner himself or the manager can say, we have such and so dollars set aside for office parties and expenses, meals during training periods, or things like that. But this is a courthouse. It's run, as we saw, on tax dollars. As such, it must keep that in mind when spending its budget. I suspect, as I said earlier, that this isn't a South Carolina problem, since it's federal funding that's supplied nationwide. I'm betting it's a nationwide problem, which makes me pretty sick. Where's the oversight? And couldn't this money be better spent on the moms and children fighting to get their fair share of child support? Couldn't it be given to women's shelters and food pantries so women could get themselves and their kids out of dangerously abusive relationships? There's just so many better places I can think of for this money to go to than dog beds and dog food and $500 birthday parties and Jägermeister and Smirnoff Ice and Valentine's gifts. But let's get back to this breakdown, Becky's spending, which, like I said, after reading this article, doesn't quite sound as bad as her colleagues. But what I did is I made a key from the color coding that I did earlier to see where the majority of her spending went. Now, in the Post and Courier's article, they said Becky took bonuses of over $15,000. This complaint has them at $9,880.10. And the 10 cents is very odd indeed. But in time, I guess we'll see what the actual number is. In meals alone, she spent $2,845.01. In gifts, $1,924.67. Some of these were meals and gifts combined. That was $1,126.68. I separated the meals and gifts with alcohol because I think there's stricter laws about spending government money on alcohol. $639.15. Money that she spent on businesses that she's affiliated with, $750. And then there was miscellaneous that was like furniture, office supplies, cleaning supplies, $2,569.51 for a total of $19,735.12, about half of which went to her directly, the rest of it to employees. This is a disgusted Cassidy O'Connell saying stay well and stay tuned.